I'm John Breeding. It's Monday, March 7th, 2011 in Austin, Texas. I have an e-list that is moderated under my name. It's called the Wildest Colts e-list for people interested in challenging the psychiatric drugging of children. It ranges a little broader to issues of psychiatry in general and issues of children in general. But the specific focus of it is the psychiatric drugging of children and those concerned with stopping it. You can go to my wildestcolts.com website to find the way to join that e-list if you're interested. We'd love to have you join us. This particular video was inspired by a recent conversation on that e-list about the subject of mental illness. List members like Clover and Deborah and many others made really good contributions, as well as a couple of psychologists, activist friends of mine, Seth Farber and Jeff Rubin. And so I want to share with you a little bit about that conversation. First of all, regarding the concept of mental illness, the stakes are very, very, very high. Thomas Zatz coined a famous analogy that stuck with me called "The Inquisition is to heresy as psychiatry is to mental illness." Now, if there's any validity to that analogy, then you can see the seriousness of it. Heretics were killed by the inquisitors, tortured and killed, and he's saying that there's a parallel between what psychiatrists do to those called mentally ill. That comes from a book that he wrote called The Manufacture of Madness. The subtitle is A Comparative Study of the Inquisition in the Mental Health Movement. You think that's extreme? Well, consider the pharmacost, a term coined by a lawyer friend of mine. The pharmacost, the destruction caused by the pharmacological approach to so-called mental illness. Peter Breggin wrote a book in 1991 called Toxic Psychiatry that lays a lot of it out. For example, that the largest epidemic of neurological disease in the history of the world was caused by a specific class of the very first psychiatric drugs, the so-called antipsychotics. Millions and millions of people with permanent neurological damage, tardive dyskinesia, caused by these drugs. He wrote a later book called Medication Madness, which I recommend, which looks at the process of involuntary intoxication, where people go off and do dangerous or insensible things under the spellbinding influence of various brain-disabling psychotropic drugs. Medication Madness. Robert Whitaker's new book, Anatomy of an Epidemic, lays out the data, as well as anyone ever has, on the damage and lack of effectiveness of various classes of psychotropic drugs, how they actually, in fact, tend to create a guarantee that one will not recover the longer you take it. Doctors of Deception by Linda Andre on the subject of electroshock in a similar category. Mental illness is a metaphor. As Thomas Zatz likes to say, it's a little piece of poetry, like spring fever. But it's poetry with consequences. Mental illness is a metaphor, and yet it's then assumed that it's real, and then the propaganda and the public relations system says that problems in living, trouble and troubling behavior are due to brain disease, chemical imbalance. The science is not there. It's a belief system, and it's a public relations campaign that's been very effective. Psychiatric oppression is a systematic mistreatment of people by virtue of putting this category as mentally ill. They become virtually targeted for destruction. That's the pharmacost. There's always a claim to virtue with any form of oppression. In this case, it's that we're treating these poor sick people. The truth is there's no evidence of real sickness, and that the treatment is experienced oftentimes as torture and generally doesn't work and causes a lot of harm. What's the real purpose behind the claim to virtue? Well, that's a long conversation, but the short answer is money. And the second short answer is social control. So, mechanism of social control for general and specific purposes. I lay out a few of them here in my book, The Necessity of Madness. Psychiatric procedures work in at least 5 important ways. 1, psychiatric procedures punish and control deviance. 2, psychiatric procedures absolve us all from social responsibility. I call it a magic trick. People are having a hard time or giving others a hard time are not individuals hurt by oppression and in need of recovery. Instead, they're biologically or genetically defective, inferior, modern-day form of eugenics. Psychiatric oppression dissolves and it distracts us from facing the tough issues of social and economic justice in people's real lives. Number 4, psychiatric procedures are at root suppressive. Drugs and electroshock act to suppress consciousness and emotion, to destroy memory, reduce energy, in short, to abort and inhibit the process of working through and reevaluating past hurts and current injustices. The subject is so busy dealing with the ill effects of the treatment that there's no time or energy left for dealing with real problems. Lastly, number 5, psychiatric procedures act to systematically quash and inhibit flexibility and creativity, discourage motivation for finding and developing genuine ways of supporting individuals to recover from harm and to grow and develop as spiritual beings. By psychiatric procedures, obviously, I'm talking about drugs and electroshock, as well as coercion and force. The key in understanding is language. Tom Zotz is the best at talking about this. One of the things he says is that psychiatric diagnoses are not descriptive, but they're prescriptive. They don't describe what's going on. They don't enhance understanding. They prescribe a course of action. And that action is about assertion of power and control. Here's an exposition of psychiatric truth that I lay out in Necessity of Madness. Let's imagine that the prescription on the psychiatrist's pad might say 12 sessions of electroshock to treat endogenous depression. A fuller exposition might look something like this. She suffers from endogenous depression. Her diagnosis is DSM-4R, whatever, 301 point, blah, blah. She's mentally ill, chronic. She needs my help. Something must be done. It is my job to help her. Her illness is biological and genetic. Her response to various drugs has not been good. She's an ideal candidate for ECT. ECT is safe and effective. I prescribe this treatment for her. It is for her own good. I am a good, caring doctor. This is a short version of psychiatric truth, the gospel according to the American Psychiatric Association. The truth, of course, is that you're inflicting brain damage, and you're inflicting brain damage, and you're inflicting brain damage. Here's another one. Nothing else works is a reflection of the truth that biopsychiatrists have nothing of real help to offer. Drugs and then electroshock. And that's it. Here's an expanded version of Nothing Else Works. I'm a doctor. I'm trained in the scientific practice of biological psychiatry. They told me mental illness is a disease to be treated by drugs and/or electroshock. Society has sanctioned me to treat the mentally ill. You are mentally ill. Drugs are the answer. Drugs aren't working. You need electroshock. I've tried everything else. Nothing else works. It's necessary to deconstruct the language. To do that, you have to actually do the research to find out the truth of what's fact, what's opinion, what's theory. In the meantime, that language is used against people who are labeled mentally ill to put them in a position of helplessness and hopelessness and powerlessness. Here's Leonard Frank has been one of my main teachers in translating psychiatric jargon into plain speech. Here's a couple of examples. Psychiatric jargon, acting out. Plain speech, acting bravely. Psychiatric jargon, cognitive deficit. Plain speech, brain damage. Psychiatric jargon, clinical diagnosis. Plain speech, character assassination. Psychiatric jargon, lack of insight. Plain speech, denial of mental illness. Everything's used against you once you're locked in that category. Electroconvulsive treatment, electroconvulsive brainwashing. Psychiatric jargon, manic, plain speech, energetic. Psychiatric jargon, custodial care, plain speech, human warehousing. Irrational, imaginative, depressed, oppressed. Patient management, patient manipulation. Hospitalized mental patient, psychiatric inmate. Mental hospital, psychiatric prison. Psychotic breakdown, spiritual breakthrough. Involuntary treatment, that would be torture. Depressed, unhappy or sad. Paranoid, watchful or vigilant. Anybody who wants clarity on this has to really do the work, as the great Bob Marley said, none but ourselves can free our minds. It's the internalized depression that's kept in place by this languaging system. If you accept it, you're locked into that dynamic. So a key aspect of liberation is the rehabilitation of our language.